Sir, could you please remain standing so the chairman can administer the oath to you?
Good afternoon. If you would, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in the matter now before this committee will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Be seated.
Could you please state your name for the record, sir?
My name is Paul Fletcher Adkins.
And could you give me a little bit of information, and the committee a little bit of information, Mr. Adkins, about your educational background?
Yes, I have degrees in law enforcement, criminal justice, a master's degree in human resource management with a minor in economics, and I completed the court executive development program offered by the Institute of Court Management through the National Center for State Courts.
Did you have any military service?
Yes, I did. I served 6 years as a commissioned officer, 2 years in Armor Branch, and 4 years in Military Police Branch.
And what did you do after you completed your education and military service?
Well, I was initially employed by the Criminal Justice and Highway Safety Division of the state of West Virginia, where I would do grant writing. Some of the grants I wrote were for the state court system, and they liked my work, and I was offered a job to work with the state court system.
Now, was that job that you were offered in grant writing, or was it some other position?
No, it was a position as assistant to the administrative director of courts, and that was Mr. Paul Crabtree.
Now, what year was that, Mr. Atkins?
It's 1980.
And how long were you employed by the Supreme Court of Appeals?
35 years.
Was all of your time in that position or an equivalent position?
Equivalent positions, yes. I did various jobs over the years as the workload changed, and there were requirements of special programs and advancements in technology and things that needed to be implemented for the court.
And what were some of those things that you implemented for the court?
Well, at one point, we had a statewide home confinement program that I managed for about 3 years. We had about 34 of the counties that were involved in this, and 250 some individuals who were on home confinement. That was one job that I did, and other jobs I've done would be the implementation of the video conferencing system that you may have seen in relation to the video conferencing between regional jails and magistrate courts. Actually installed them and programmed them myself. Also installed them in the circuit courts and the majority of family courts.
What was your job description like as assistant to the administrative director?
Well, as assistant to the administrative director, it was like being the right-hand man to the director and implementing programs as directed and doing administrative tasks.
Could you give us some background on what those administrative tasks included?
Well, most recently, the tasks have included, as I said, maintaining the video conferencing system. We also did installation of evidence presentation equipment in all of the circuit courts. That would involve preparing the infrastructure at the county courthouses and getting it ready for the installation of the video conferencing equipment and coordinating that with the vendors providing the equipment.
Did you have the responsibility for control of inventory of many of the physical assets of the court system?
There was a program in the state's financial information management system that was for inventory of state property, and as items were purchased, the purchasing section would enter them into the inventory. The inventory was maintained on this older system. And when the Oasis system was installed, we had to convert that data and enter it into the Oasis system. On the old system, initially, everything down to waste baskets and tape dispensers and every little item was included in that inventory, so it was not a very good thing to maintain. The Oasis system, the guidelines were that you would only place items in the Oasis system if they were valued at $1,000 or if it was a computer server or equipment of any value.
And I know you didn't get to hear Mr. Harvey's testimony, but the testimony that he gave, I believe, related to the fact that all of those electronic items of that nature, all the computational systems would have been inventoried and controlled by the court. And that is your recollection as well?
Yes, the IT department kept their own separate internal listing of their computer equipment, and that was primarily so that they would know what they had on hand and what they needed to order to keep stock and to be able to have replacements ready when things break down, as they always do with computer equipment. But in addition to this internal control that they maintained in the IT section, there was an Oasis listing of the actual property of the court.
How extensive and how lengthy was that list, if we were to talk about it in terms of printed pages?
Well, I think it was in the neighborhood of 1,300 pages or something of that nature, and it included every court in the state, family court, magistrate court, circuit court, any place that we had equipment, even the Capitol also.
Now, as you were employed there at the court, did your duties evolve over time?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, a good example is the home confinement program. It was not heavily staffed, and at that time the computer systems were not nearly as sophisticated as they are today. So what I would do is at 5 o'clock each morning, I would get up and get some coffee, go to the basement where I had a computer that was provided by the state, and sit down at my own desk, thank you, and pull down the information on all of the home confinees and divide it into the various counties of jurisdiction, and I would send this information to the probation officers so it would be on their printer each morning when they came in, and they would know if, yes, all their probationers are where they should be, or no, one left last night without permission. So that way they were able to track everybody that was on home confinement. After doing the morning report, I would go in, monitor the computer system at work, receive orders from the various courts designating people to be put on the home confinement system. I would program the home confinement system after it was maintained, checked, programmed, and sent by UPS to the county so the probation officer could put the person on the next day, or at least by the day following that. Now, sometimes I'd get an order near close of business, and I'd have to go ahead and act on that court order, program the equipment, and make a run down to the UPS office in South Charleston so it would get in that evening's outgoing shipment. So that would mean that from 5 in the morning till, sometime around 6, I'd be involved in that. And additionally, Saturday, you'd have to come in and check the equipment, make sure it was operating, and Sunday was usually a day where you just have to go in and reload the paper on the printers that would run continually to give you a printout of what's actually happening with the monitoring. So in many instances, you know, I'd be working a 60-hour week, and I did that for about 3 years or so.
And that was just with the home confinement system?
That was just the home confinement system, which was my primary duty at that time.
So let me ask you, I mean, when you retired from the court, that was when?
October of 2015.
And you've been there 35 years?
35 years.
How many persons replaced you in your duties at the court?
Well, they had a technician who did a lot of the technological work, and they had another person doing the inventory and surplus property equipment, and one other person doing the internal management and maintenance and a lot of the different things that were going on.
So it's safe to say then that you essentially were doing the work of what is now being done by 3 different individuals at the court?
Pretty much.
As part of that, you've mentioned that you had responsibility for surplus property and the surplusing of that surplus property. Could you tell us how things went from being an item under the control and administration of the court to then going to surplus property?
Usually when we would have an item that was no longer needed in any of the courts around the state, they would notify us that they would like to get rid of this equipment. But more often what would happen is we would buy new furniture for a court, and the old furniture would have to be delivered to the surplus property division. Now, it's not as simple as loading it up and taking it down there. The surplus property division would require a listing of all the items to be turned in by state tag and serial number, description of the item, and put this all in a listing, and you send it to the surplus property division by computer and request a turn-in document number.
It's an alarm.
So the property could not be turned in until the surplus property division issued this number. After the number was issued,
You stop just a minute, please,
Yes.
till we figure out what's going on. Thank you.
That's the only person who gets
Since somebody doesn't want to hear what he has to say.
What is it? Is it fire alarm? All right. That's a fire alarm, folks. We better pay close attention to it.
I don't know. I guess stick with it. Yeah. I hacked into it. Yeah. Yeah. I don't.
Remember where you were? Remember where you were? All right, please take your seats and we'll resume the testimony of Mr. Atkins here momentarily. take it, Mr. Atkins, that was not a response you anticipated, right?
No.
All right.
All right,
I didn't arrange that, no.
I think we had asked you about the disposal of surplus property. So
Yes,
let's go
and
back and
I
start
was
with that.
explaining that you had to get a number from the surplus unit to be authorized to turn the property in. And then you would have to call them and schedule a date for the turn-in, because sometimes they had periods of time where you could not turn in items because they were preparing for a sale. So you'd have to make sure that they would give you an actual date where you could bring the property down, and then arrange for a mover to take the property, which would usually be located in our warehouse, and take it down and actually turn it into the surplus property unit. And that's the only way by code that we can properly dispose of property. I would occasionally have people ask, well, can I have this or can I have that out of the surplus property that's going to be turned in? And I would tell them, well, you can contact the surplus property division, and when it gets down there, it'll be available for sale. And, you know, that's what would happen there.
So there was a fairly well-developed system that the court was aware of and practiced, usually with regard to the surplusing and disposal of property. That's fair to say?
Yes, that's correct. That's the process that we used, and like I say, it was automated, it was computerized, and you tracked each item by computer from the time that you received it and identified it for turn-in through the time it was approved and a turn-in number was given and the scheduling was set, and then you would receive a signed receipt that it was received by the surplus property division. So it was a complete, you know, closed type turn-in system.
And you managed property, as I understand it, not merely for the Supreme Court of Appeals, but also for subordinate courts under its umbrella, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was a statewide system for all of the courts, the circuit court, magistrate court, family court. No municipal courts are part of the court system, of course.
And you had primary responsibility, as I understand it, for not only the Supreme Court, but also primary responsibility for properties allocated to the magistrate and family courts, correct?
Yes, both of those courts and the circuit courts. Now, in the circuit courts, much of the furniture is provided by code by the county commissions. And mostly the equipment in the circuit courts would be the computer equipment, evidence presentation equipment, video conferencing equipment, and any other equipment that might be specifically needed for the office needs of the court.
But with regard to the other courts, you had, or at least the Supreme Court had, and you oversaw the primary responsibility for providing all the needed items for those subordinate courts.
Yes, that's correct.
And this seems like a fairly elaborate process that had to be going through to surplus it, and you've noted that you had inventory controls as well. There is a centralized warehouse for these items?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we have two warehouses that the Supreme Court has. One primarily holds the actual records of the court. In fact, it's pretty interesting. You have some of the records that are actually records from the Court of Virginia going back to, I believe it was like 1843. So it's a very interesting thing for anybody interested in history, but we have those in the warehouse that's located on Piedmont Road. The other warehouse is located in Kanawha City, and it is primarily used for furniture and computer equipment and any other items that may be used by the court system.
Now, I take it that in the management of this property, you have developed a number of procedures and contacts that move this property. How are moves of this property to the courts and from the courts usually handled?
Well, Young's Moving Service is a company that we have used for a long period of time. I've been retired now since 2005. I don't know if they're still used. I suspect they would be because they have done such a good job. They're very responsible movers. Now, they are not a nationally affiliated moving group, so the expense for using these movers is much less. Basically, they buy used U-Haul trucks and use them to transport. It'll be the owner and usually a helper or two to do these moves. So it's a cost-saving factor for the state to use these people, and they're definitely a trusted vendor because we have used them so long, and they know what the court system requires, and they in fact know the location of everything in the court system here, so we can trust them to do work and not require a great deal of supervision as we would if we would have a different person doing it every time.
And that's because of the fact that they have this long-standing relationship with the courts.
Yes, that's true.
And you've never had any complaints in the time that you were there about the work that they performed or their efficiency or efficacy?
No complaints. And in fact, we've had good comments on, what hard workers they are from people out in the county, and they are.
The item, and I'm not sure, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, as to which exhibit number we have on this, John. The 21. The Elmo won't work and we don't have it scanned in. Well, I've got a hard copy of it. I can take over to Mr. Atkins, if I may.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Mr. Atkins, I've handed you an item which is our exhibit number 21, which is approximately 4 pages in length. It purports to be a bill and some records received from the Supreme Court of Appeals concerning the movement of certain items of furniture, and I'd like to have an opportunity to ask you some questions about that. Now, the first item on the cover sheet is an item from the Financial Information Management System. Is that the system that you were referring to that was the predecessor to OASIS?
Yes, that's correct. The FIM system, you can see it right across the top of the form, Financial Information Management System.
And this is an invoice that was prepared purportedly on July the 8th, 2013, with regard to the court. Who is or was Sandra Johnson?
One of the payment clerks at the court. Okay.
And this purports to be a bill that was submitted from Young's Moving Service. I believe if you'll turn to page 4, we have the actual physical copy of that bill that was presented by Young's.
Yes.
And your signature is on that copy, sir?
Yes, I approved this bill when it came in.
And it appears you approved that on June the 29th.
Yes, that's correct.
And there's a note here with your initials that requests from June 1 and June 18 were consolidated into one move.
Yes, that's correct. If you look at the exhibit that's dated on June 1, that was when I was first advised that we needed to move the furniture from Justice Lawfrey's office to prepare for renovation of the office.
Now, Mr. Atkins, let me ask you, when did renovation of the Justice's offices commence?
I believe it was earlier that year. I'm not sure of the exact time.
So sometime early in 2013?
I believe that's correct.
Now, at that point, I assume that Justice Lawfrey had simply taken the office that was vacated by his predecessor and was using that workspace before its renovation.
Yes, that's correct.
And I note on this item that there has been a change of date. Is that change of date in your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Could you tell us what the date has changed from and what it's changed to?
I received a request to change the date to June 20th, and I received that request on June 18th.
And from whom did you receive that request?
I really don't remember. That was 5 years ago, and I don't know if I received it by email or somebody called me on the phone or just told me. I don't know who asked me to do that.
But you were asked to do it?
Yes.
And you made that change?
Yes, I made the change.
I note that the original item here on June 1st, the original request that was sent from you to Mr. Young, notes that the assistance will be to move the furniture in the Capitol building and some moving to the Venable warehouse.
To the Venable warehouse, yes.
And so in your understanding of what was to be done that day, furnishings of some sort, which I don't know that you were aware of, and you can tell us if you were to be taken from Justice Lawfrey's office while it was being renovated and stored in the warehouse during the pendency of that renovation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I understood, that we needed to move the furniture out of the office so the renovations could begin.
Let me ask you about those renovations. Now, were you involved in that renovation process at all?
Other than just removing the furniture, no, I didn't have any decision-making or anything in that.
No oversight, no involvement other than moving the furniture?
I believe there was an architect involved and the contractors, and that was done in conjunction with Mr. Canterbury and the justices involved.
And so you scheduled this move of the furniture from Justice Lawfrey's office. You rescheduled it to June 20th. And I think the second item there on the exhibit is dated on the 18th of June. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. Since the date was going to be changed, I sent a new request to Scott Young at Scott Young's Moving so we could coordinate the move for that day. And fortunately, he was available, so we could do that on that day. And he received that, and I confirmed it with him to make sure that there wouldn't be any slip-up. And he said, yeah, he could do the work on the 20th.
And it appears that because it was the 150th anniversary of West Virginia statehood, you had to make some special arrangements for Mr. Young and his team to get into the building. Could you explain that for the committee?
Well, there were roadblocks at various points around the Capitol so that the various celebrations could be held. And the movers would need to get to the East Wing loading dock to pick up his furniture. So they would have to go past a roadblock. So I contacted Matt Brown, the director of the Capitol Police, to see about getting authorization for my movers to come in on that day to actually meet with Justice Lawfrey to get the furniture picked up. And I had to do that, and also any time before I would have a mover or air conditioning technician or workman or anything like that to have access to the East Wing loading dock, I would always call ahead to the Capitol Police so they would be notified that, yes, you should have this person on your list for access, and yes, they are coming in 30 minutes to an hour. Usually I call ahead so that the Capitol Police would be expecting them, because they controlled access to the East Wing dock, and they could remotely open the door, and they would view people through remote cameras and actually talk with them on the intercom system to make sure it was who they were expecting so they could maintain proper control of security in the building.
And as someone with previous law enforcement and security background yourself, you felt that that was a reasonable protocol to follow?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The Capitol Police did an excellent job that way, and I developed a good working relationship with them, so they knew that when I called them about something, that it was something that was valid, and that they could be confident that, yes, they can allow people to have that access.
Now, after you had transmitted this to Mr. Young, were you present at the Capitol that day when Young's Moving Service actually showed up to perform the execution of this agreement?
Well, this was so long ago that I really can't say whether I came in and made sure physically that they got up there, or if I just called and talked with them on the cell phone or not. But I just made sure that they did get in contact with Justice Lawfrey.
Now, you said you placed them in contact with Justice Lawfrey. To the best of your information and belief, was Justice Lawfrey present when they came to remove those items from his office?
Well, he would have had to have allowed them access to the chambers area to get the furniture.
Because did you not have access to the chambers area?
I would have access to the chambers area,
But
yes.
it was he on that day who, to the best of your knowledge, allowed them access to the chambers area?
Yeah, well, he must have been there, yes.
And so you do not remember at all being present and supervising any of the execution of this contract yourself?
This was one of many, many furniture moves that I did over the years, and, you know, they all kind of run together, and, you know, was I there or not? I came into the Capitol so many times and did so many furniture moves. You know, I can't say if I was there or not, but I do know that the furniture was successfully picked up by Young's Moving, and the arrangement was that when they had the truck full and they were ready to go to the Venable Avenue warehouse, they were to give me a call on my cell phone, and I would meet them at the warehouse, because the warehouse was closed and it was not manned since it was a state holiday. So I would have to let them in to unload the furniture. So that's what was done. They called me as soon as they had all the furniture and they were on the way to the Venable warehouse, and I met them there and opened up the warehouse. See, the warehouse had a security system in it that we had installed so that there would be no break-in while overnight or anything like that. And also there's a code to access and open the doors to allow vehicles into that warehouse. So I had to be there to allow them entry to the warehouse and to make sure that the furniture and other items were placed in an area so it was designated in a certain place and we would know what it was, so when it was to be returned, we'd be able to get those exact items, and they wouldn't be mixed in with the other items.
Because as you've earlier testified, this warehouse houses all of the furniture and items that the court utilizes as a repository for the courts about the state.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the state surplus property would be brought back from the counties, and so that we would have items to use as replacements, we would often keep the best desks or items of furniture back and not turn them into surplus property, because occasionally you'd have furniture that would be damaged by water leaks or different types of damage out in the field, and if we had a good item that was similar, we could just replace it with that rather than buying new.
But this warehouse, as you noted just a little while ago, was a secured warehouse.
Yes, it was secured.
And that's because of the value of the items that were contained in it.
Oh yes, there was computer equipment there of significant value, in addition to the furniture and other items.
So someone like yourself who had the codes and the information that was necessary to access it had to go down there in order to allow Young's to make this drop-off?
Oh, definitely, yeah. It was locked up and secured.
Do you know what time of day approximately on the 20th that you received that call?
Not exactly, but it was in the evening, because I know it took them some time to load and bring it down, and then of course they would have to unload while I was there, So it went into the, not to the late evening, but into the late afternoon probably.
Now, while you were there, did you assist in the unloading process, or were you just there to facilitate the entry into the building?
Just there to facilitate and manage it, and I wouldn't want to take their work away from them by unloading it myself.
Do you recall anything about the items that were deposited in the warehouse that evening?
What do you...
I mean, did you see any of the items that were removed from the truck and placed into the warehouse that evening while you were there?
Well, yes. Yeah, I saw them all unloaded.
Do you have any recollection as to what those items were?
There was nothing specific that stood out in my mind about it. It was just office furniture.
And so following that, after they completed their moving, you, I presume, locked the building back?
Yes, that's correct.
And then everybody departed from there that evening?
Yes.
Did you have any conversation with them about anything that they had moved that day or anything of that nature that you can recall?
No, I don't recall that they mentioned anything out of the ordinary.
And so you received on or about the next day an invoice which you approved on the 29th. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it noted that the moving services had been performed.
Yes.
And that they had delivered an item to Dudley Drive.
Yes.
And then returned to the state capitol to finish loading and delivered those remaining items.
Yes.
Did you at any time ask Mr. Young or Justice Lawfrey about the Dudley Drive trip?
No, I did not.
And could you elaborate on why you did not?
Well, if something was delivered to Dudley Drive and it was under the supervision of the justice, there would be nothing I had to say about it.
Because it would have been items removed from his office.
Yes.
Presumably in his possession.
Yes.
At his order.
Yes.
So it would have been solely his responsibility as you understood it.
Well, I would think so, yes.
And so you saw nothing out of the ordinary when you processed this request?
I can't tell you what 5 years ago went through my mind about it, but I imagine I didn't think there was any problem with it.
Let me ask you, you've testified that you had the control over the inventory of the court. Could you explain for the committee what you believe that a Cass Gilbert desk is?
Well, I only have what hearsay information about this, but there are several light oak, they're not really large, but medium-sized desks that are purported by some people to have been original to the Capitol.
And the court has some of these in the court's property inventory.
Yes, and they also actually have matching tables that are, fairly large-sized table, like work tables.
And they have one of those for each of the desks. Was that the idea as you understand it, or?
I believe that's correct.
And we heard testimony yesterday that one of those desks may be in the northern part of the state in a courthouse or a courtroom. Do you have any knowledge as to that?
No, I don't.
And the court, to your understanding and belief, still has at least 4 of those 5 desks that were originally supposedly purchased.
Well, I haven't made a count or inventory of that myself, but that's what I've heard.
And to the best of your information, that's what you believe?
Yes.
Do you know personally if at the time that this move occurred, if Justice Lawfrey was using one of those as his judicial desk?
He did use one as when he was in a clerk position with the court, I know. I'm not sure if he had that in his chamber's office or not.
At any time subsequent to 2013, once the renovation had been complete, were you tasked, or anyone that you know of tasked, with obtaining a desk for Justice Lawfrey?
No, I don't know about that.
You did not accompany the justice or the folks from Young's moving to his house, did you?
No, I have not been to Justice Lawfrey's house either in a work situation or either in a social situation, either one.
You were employed by the court for approximately 35 years. When you left, were there any unusual conditions placed upon you as you left the court's employ?
No.
Were you required at any time to sign a non-disclosure agreement or a secrecy agreement or any other agreement that purported to limit your ability to discuss matters that took place while you were employed by the court?
No, sir. I was not presented with any document like that, nor had I ever heard of anyone in the employ of the court ever being presented with any document like that.
So this was not a generally accepted policy at the time that you were employed by the court?
No, it was not.
If you'll give me just 1 second. One question came up in our earlier discussion when you were here this morning. Did you know that, anything about the court's travel policy?
There was a travel policy that had outlined procedures for obtaining accommodations and air travel and use of vehicles.
Did you ever have to make use of applications made under that travel policy yourself?
Yes. I know that for vehicle travel, there was a computerized program where you would request a vehicle and enter the dates that you would request the vehicle, the type of vehicle you need, whether it would be a sedan or van or whatever, and the purpose of the travel and the location that you were going to.
And just to reiterate, at the times that you were compelled by the necessity of your duties to travel within the state to various locations, you had to specify the purpose of each of those visits.
Yes, that's correct. I did both on the computerized system and on the occasions where I used the paper form that was the standard West Virginia travel form. I would list the mode of travel. If I was using a state vehicle, I'd list the license number, I'd list the destination, and I'd list the purpose of the travel.
And to the best of your knowledge, all that was required of you in order to conform to the travel policy of the court as a court employee?
Oh, yes. If someone would not fill that out and send it into our finance section, they'd get it back. Without
payment?
Well, it would just be sent back before it was sent to the auditor or the treasurer.
All right, Mr. Atkins, that's all I have for you right now.
All right, we're going to start on this side at this time, and I'll start with the gentleman from the 62nd. If you have questions, Delegate Ovington.
No questions. No questions at this time.
Delegate Foster.
I had a question about the Young's moving service. Whenever the furniture was moved, they stopped at I forget the name of the road, but at Justice Lawfrey's house and on Dudley Drive, and something was dropped off there, and then did they return to the Capitol to load the rest of the furniture? Is that correct?
That is seems to be what they say on the invoice, that it looks as though they apparently did this first and then came back to the Capitol and completed the actual work that I had requested. So it appears that the the trip up to Dudley Road was done first.
And where you had to get them through, I guess, roadblock into the Capitol, that's one thing I was confused about is, did you have to make a second phone call to notify, hey, these people are coming? Did they call you? Or?
Well, they would have a copy of this form, and I had coordinated with Matt Brown of the Capitol Security, the Capitol Police, to allow them to enter with that form, so they would have been able to get through again.
So that 10-30-minute window that you talked about wouldn't have had to happen a second time, that notification?
No.
Okay. And they would just use the form to come back in the second time, and then when you received the phone call was whenever the final load of furniture that was going to the warehouse?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Fast.
Thank you. This travel policy you spoke of, was that a written policy or was that a form that was supposed to be filled out for reimbursement or payment?
I believe that there is a written policy, and it's not like I would review it each time I travel, so I probably saw it, years ago and would just abide by it.
Well, as you sit here today, can you state under oath that there actually was a written policy?
Yes, I think there is. Yes, I'm concerned.
And who would have had possession of that policy?
It would have been in the court administrator's office.
And who would have been in charge of implementing and overseeing that policy?
The overall responsibility would have been with the administrative director of courts, Mr. Canterbury.
Okay. And was that while you were there, was that policy ever changed or revised?
I don't know, because to revise it, it would have been reviewed by the court. A revision would have been recommended by the court administrator, and it would have had to have been approved by the court, and it may have just been placed in the records of the court, and it wouldn't been that I would have necessarily known about them doing that unless there was some policy memo that was sent out about it.
Do you believe that you ever physically laid eyes on that policy, read that policy, or were you just told about it and told how to operate under it?
I believe that I actually did read the policies when I was initially hired, but that was 35 years ago. And, it makes sense to follow the forms, use the proper forms. If a computer program is presented to you to request a vehicle, well, we would all use that. And it required that you list a destination and keep track of everything that was involved in it.
Do you know if that form that you used would still be around anywhere, or a copy of that form?
Well, we used it was a WV form, green in color, and it was a travel form that we had used that for years.
Was there a time that you stopped using it?
For out-of-state travel, you'd have one form. For in-state travel, you'd have a different form. So I had not done any out-of-state travel for a long time, so I'm not sure if they had changed that or not.
Was there a time that you stopped using any forms, in-state or out-of-state?
When the computer request for the vehicles was put in place, I would use the computerized form to request and access a vehicle. And it would require that you list the type of vehicle you needed, the dates you needed, the destination, and any pertinent information that should be recorded about the travel.
When was that form, or the computerized form, implemented?
I'm not really sure.
Approximation?
Probably 10 years ago or so, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay. The renovations, there's been a lot of discussion about renovations in the justices' offices. You've seen a lot of justices come and go in your tenure, obviously. Had there been ongoing renovations for some time in the last 10 years?
Well, that's an interesting situation that I would like to explain to the committee, that the General Services Division had overall responsibility for maintenance of the Capitol building. And for 25 years or so, I had worked with them and developed a close relationship so that anytime we needed electrical work, plumbing work, HVAC, repair, or anything of that nature, painting, renovating, things of that nature, I would request it, and the General Services Division would respond. Now, they had two painters who were very good painters, Rick and Ellie. And anytime that we had an office that really was in bad shape and needed to be painted, we'd put a request in for the painters, and they'd come up, and usually within a day or two, they'd repaint the office, and that was fine. And that went on for 25 years or so. Well, Ellie passed away, and Rick became disabled and had to quit. So the General Services Division decided, well, we won't hire new painters, we'll just have contractors do this. So then it became much more difficult to try to get any work done like that. So it may be that the court decided, well, you know, contractors, well, we know contractors.
Well, my question was, had there, let's say, since 2008, 2005, 2007, somewhere in there, had there been some significant renovations in various justices' offices?
Well, there had not been a lot of renovation done for several years prior to the renovations that we're all talking about here.
Well, when a new justice comes in, is it customary for them to renovate their office?
They would often have certain things done in their office. I know when Justice Benjamin came on the court, he had some renovations done. He needed some lighting because, you know, the lighting in many of those offices is not very good. And painting and renovation and various things were done to that office.
I heard a statement that Justice, one of the female justices, I forget if it was Workman or Davis, had like a $500,000 renovation done to their office. Can you verify that or give me any information on whether anything like that occurred?
Well, I didn't work with the architects or the contractors on that directly, but all I know is that's what I've heard, and I think that's publicly available information. But from my own personal knowledge, I don't know that, but I believe it to be true.
Well, you were there in the court, and in your position, did you see significant renovations done at one of their offices?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And then, now, Justice Lawfrey, let's talk about him. When he came on the scene in 2013, had there already been ongoing renovations with other justices, Workman, Davis, Benjamin, prior to Justice Lawfrey coming on the scene?
Yes, there had been, during that time period, I'm not sure if some may have started before or maybe some started after, but it was all during that general time period. And
did Justice Lawfrey have his office renovated when he came on in 2013?
Yes, he did. Okay,
and just in the significance or the involvement, was his renovations any different than Justice Davis's or Justice Workman's or Justice Benjamin's?
Well, they were all very different and individualized, you might say.
Just general cost-wise, any differences?
Well, I would say that Justice Davis's office renovation was probably the most expensive, and I think Justice Workman's may have been the least expensive. And the other one's somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Items moved out June 20, 2013. Would any of those items been captured on surveillance video that we would still have access to today?
The Capitol Police would have to let you know that. I don't know if their records go back that far or not. I do know that they have a very sophisticated system that has the capability of digital enhancement. I don't know what the time frame is for their retention of records, but it could be possible it would be on a separate hard drive or something somewhere if they retain permanent records.
Okay. And the items that made up these that were moved pursuant to this invoice and fax,
yes, sir.
Exhibit 21, were those, I see that you are the one that sent the faxes to Young's Moving Services. Were you directed to do that by someone?
Yes, I was directed to do that. I can't tell you for sure exactly whether I got the direction through Mr. Canterbury's office or directly from Justice Lawfrey's office, but you know, it was so long ago I can't specifically remember that.
Could it have been that the contractor would have contacted you and said, hey, we're at the point we're going to need to clear things out so we can do some work? Could that have happened?
No, I didn't have any contact with the contractors during the work phase on all of these.
Okay. Do you know for sure whether or not a Cass Gilbert desk or a blue-green couch was ever transferred from the Supreme Court to Justice Lawfrey's house?
I don't remember seeing that with my own eyes, and I can't say for sure what was dropped off that day.
Do you know if a Cass Gilbert desk disappeared from the courthouse that day? This court building, Supreme Court.
I couldn't say that I would really know that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Second row. All right, we'll return to the right-hand side. Delegate Lane.
Thank you, sir, for being here today. I'm looking at your June 1 memo, and it says, I would like you to provide assistance to move the furniture in the Capitol building and some moving to the Venable warehouse. Now,
Yes.
at that point, did you know what furniture Justice Lawfrey wanted moved?
I knew all of the office furniture should be removed from his office so the renovation could be done. Some furniture, when these moves were being done, was located in areas behind the curtains in the Supreme Court courtroom, so it'd be convenient. And other items were actually taken to the Venable warehouse. So there was both moving in the Capitol building and moving to the Venable warehouse.
So, to the best of your recollection, on that day, Justice Lawfrey wanted furniture moved from his office. Now, would this have been his chambers, or would it have been his old office when he was a law clerk?
It would be the chambers.
Okay, now as you recall, was all of the furniture that was in the chambers to be removed?
Yes, that's correct. It had to be removed so the contractors could do their work.
And so, do you remember, was there a desk in his office?
Well, I'm sure there was, but I don't have a memory of what desk was in there at the time.
Now, you, on that day, you went to the Venable Avenue warehouse.
Yes.
And you saw the items unloaded.
Yes.
Do you recall, was there a desk unloaded that day?
I don't recall. I just know the furniture was offloaded.
Just out of curiosity, after all of the furniture was removed from Justice Lawfrey's office, where did he work until it all came back?
I know that there were specific arrangements made for that in other parts of the court, but I can't remember exactly what was done. It seems to me that there were some work areas that were available in the state law library at the time. I hadn't given that any thought, but I believe that there may have been areas that were set up mostly for the staff to work and some places for the justices to work.
Okay, and looking at your June 18 memo and looking at the letterhead, since Stephen Canterbury was administrative director, and then your signature is P. Fletcher Adkins, director, administrative service. So what exactly is the difference between a director of administrative service and an administrative director?
Well, Mr. Canterbury was the director of the courts for the state of West Virginia, and the director of administrative services was a subordinate position that would take care of many of the administrative duties I've talked about before. And in the court administrator's office, we had a very flat organizational chart, meaning that Mr. Canterbury would directly supervise and interact with a large number of people compared to what you might see in some organizations. There may have been a dozen or more people that directly reported to and worked with Mr. Canterbury, and I was one of them.
Okay, you may have said this, and I have forgotten, so forgive me if you've already answered this. When these items were taken from the court to the Venable warehouse, was a record cap of what was moved from the court to the warehouse?
No, there was not. The items were moved to a specific area in the warehouse so that those items could be brought directly back to Justice Lawfrey's office without any problem.
Okay. Do you remember, were those items brought back from his office?
Oh, yes.
I mean, brought back from the warehouse to his office?
Yes. When the office was completed, they were returned.
Okay, and did that include a desk?
I'm not sure. If there was one in the warehouse, it came back.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Delegate Pushkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Atkins, for being here.
Certainly.
First of all, you said that you don't remember whose decision it was to change from Friday the 20th, the moving day to be from Friday the 21st to Thursday the 20th. You don't recall whose decision that was. Do you recall if why the decision was made, or why they would rather do it on West Virginia Day?
No one gave me a reason for it. I didn't infer anything from that change. It's just somebody wanted to change for some reason.
You didn't find it odd that they would want it on a day that the street would be blocked off on California Avenue?
No.
Okay. And that actually we found out yesterday the legislature and the governor were all in Wheeling for interim meetings. Or do you recall that event at all, or the legislature having interims in Wheeling that day?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, well, that's what I learned that yesterday. A couple more things. I'm not going to give an exact number of how many more things. Are there like a minimum amount of miles that the moving company charges for?
No, it was just an agreement for the 85 cents per mile.
Okay, because I was looking at the invoice and with 84, do they charge back miles, like back and forth from cross lanes to get here?
They do portal to portal.
What's that?
Yes, from their point of origin.
Okay, because it seems to me 84 is pretty high. Also, 9 hours. I mean, to be here from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Seems like an awful long time for just office furniture in an office in the Capitol. That's just my opinion. But speaking of which, the office furniture. Well, you said earlier there was a surplus property policy, correct?
Yes.
That anything that is no longer used that belongs to the state, it goes to that warehouse on Venable Avenue, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you were not aware that there was going to be a trip to Dudley Drive first?
No, I was not aware of that.
Okay. But that's in the invoice. Is that the first time you learned of it, is when you received this invoice?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, on this order dated June 1st, it said, I would like you to provide assistance to move furniture into the Capitol building and some moving to the Venable warehouse. I guess, would that mean like moving from one office to another in the Capitol and then some of it to the warehouse?
Well, some of the furniture was stored in the Capitol and would have to have been moved from Justice Lawfrey's office. I know that at some point office furniture was stored behind the curtains in the courtroom, and the remainder was taken to the Venable warehouse.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then apparently from the invoice, some, that you weren't aware of till after it happened, but some was taken to Dudley Drive. So that trip to Dudley Drive, no matter what they took there, if it was state property, if it was in this Capitol before Justice Lawfrey was elected, or even before he even worked here as a clerk, if it belonged in this Capitol and went to Dudley Drive, would that be a violation of that surplus property policy?
Well, it depends on whether the justices of the court have total disposition on of the property of the court or not. So I didn't know if this was something that may have been his personal property. I may have thought that at the time. I'm not sure what I thought about it, but I didn't think anything was amiss.
Well, so I guess in the policy it doesn't state, or does it state that if a Supreme Court justice basically claims it, that they would be allowed to take it home? That's not in the policy.
No, it certainly would not be. It would be the same for everybody.
Well, I'm saying if it's state property and it doesn't go to the warehouse, it goes to a justice's home, would that be a violation of that policy, of that surplus property policy?
I believe it would.
Okay. Thank you. And the reason, I know it was asked earlier if you saw the desk, the Cass Gilbert desk, unloaded. You weren't at his house. And you stated that Justice Lawfrey would have had to have been here in order to let them into his chambers, because you weren't here to let him into chambers.
Yes,
and I imagine
correct.
He would have had to have been there at his house to let him in his house. But you said you didn't see it moved. But do you remember, I remember at the time when this was coming out, that Justice Lawfrey said to the press and in an op-ed that he did have these items in his house. Do you remember that as well as I did, that he said that it was in his house?
I believe that I may have read a newspaper article or seen a news release about something about that.
And do you remember that he referred to a home office policy when giving a reason why he had that desk in his house? He referred to a policy of Supreme Court justices being allowed to have a home office.
That was in the press, but I have no knowledge of that by my I don't have any personal knowledge of that myself.
Well, I think it was Ms. Bundy over at the Supreme Court put out a statement saying that. You remember that?
Yes, I read about that in the paper.
Okay. Is there a home office policy?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Did you read the? I can't remember what month it was that when then Chief Justice Lawfrey wrote an op-ed that was explaining his side of this. Did you read that? You remember it?
No.
Okay. Well, one of the things we haven't discussed yet, but I don't know if you have any knowledge of it, was we talked about the renovations to the offices, and I know one of the more publicized items was the flooring, the tile floor that was put in Chief Justice Lawfrey's office with the, I guess Tucker County was made out of a different, the rest of it were wood tiles, and that was like a blue granite tile, I guess customized for his office. He had stated that decision was, I believe, was made by then the court administrator Canterbury. Were you around at that time? Do you know who picked out the floor?
I believe there was some work by both Mr. Canterbury and Justice Lawfrey on that. There was a hand-drawn rendering of what was wanted.
There was a rendering that was drawn by, do you remember if it was drawn by Justice Lawfrey?
Not by my personal knowledge, I couldn't say.
Okay. Because we're getting, I believe when we're done with your testimony, we're going to see some news stories where then Chief Justice Lawfrey, in my opinion, blames the former administrator Canterbury for these decisions.
And I would like to apologize to the committee if I seem evasive, because I only want to testify to those things that I know by personal knowledge and not something I may have read or heard of in a newspaper article or a TV report.
Okay. Well, I don't think you're being evasive at all. I appreciate you just trying to be as honest as possible, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, I guess, and you still work over in the court?
No, I retired in October of 2015.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you right now. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Delegate Zatazalo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Atkins, for being here. I just have something you said that I wanted to a little further discussion on, and that is something to the effect that when justices decide to do something, then it becomes something that is the disposition due to the court's decision. Is that an unwritten kind of rule that justices have some latitude as far as disposition of items in the court?
Well, the court, of course, is in possession of all of the items, and, you know, of course, they have the responsibility to see that they're properly used, whatever that would be, and that would be in accordance with the state code and regulations as far as surplus property is concerned.
So it's not a written rule, but it is assumed that they will dispose properly of materials. Is that correct?
There have been exceptions that occurred it was many years ago, where a justice of the court was allowed to buy a volume of legal books that were approved. The sale of the books was approved by the court to the retiring justice, and a value was properly determined by people that could assess the value of a set of books, and the money was paid. So there has been that done in the past, that type of an arrangement.
Upon retirement?
Upon retirement, yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. That's helpful.
Delegate Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Atkins, for being here and making yourself available.
Certainly.
In respect to the warehouse, to maintain custody, security, and control of the items within the warehouse, was the access code readily available to other persons in the court system, or in the court employees?
It was extremely limited. Only the employees who worked at the warehouse had that, and I had it, and one of the court runners had it, because he would have to access the warehouse occasionally. But it was closely held, and we would even have to let the IT people in when they would come to get the computer equipment.
Would there any reason being that the justices would have that code?
No. No, they would not.
So they wouldn't have access without your knowledge?
Without my knowledge, or a warehouse employee, or the court messenger.
Okay. To access, is there an electronic lock on that warehouse?
Yes. There is a regular access door that's kept locked, and it is attached to the security system, and it's a drive-through type of warehouse. You can come in one set of garage doors, go in and load or unload, and go out the back without having to turn around or back up. That's a much more safe arrangement than a loading dock type of a situation. So we were fortunate to have a warehouse with that. Now, to access the door, you had to have a security code. Then, to turn off the security system, you had to have a separate code to turn off the security system. So it was pretty secure.
So it's safe to say that very limited amount of persons had those codes.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And the electronic lock of the door and on the alarm system, having installed alarm systems myself, I know there's electronic logs. Mm-hmm. Is there one electronic log kept for access, egress, and ingress of the building?
It was an ADT system, so I imagine that could be pulled down. There wasn't a printout or anything kept on that.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Delegate Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I had some questions, so I wanted to ask you. Just to clarify your testimony earlier, we were talking about the memos that are dated, and I got confused because I have it in my notes that you said you received a request on June 18th to change the moving date from the 21st to the 20th, but I see it marked out on the June 1 memo. So I just wanted to make sure that your testimony was correct in that representation.
Yes, the June 1 memo was originally sent to Young's Moving when we anticipated that the move would be on June 21st, which would be a Friday. And then I sent another fax to Young's Moving on June 18th asking that they move to June 20th.
Okay, and the only reason why I asked that question is I was confused because on the June 1st memo, it's marked out on that one, June 20th. So I didn't know if you found out before June 1 that the date was going to be changed.
No, I did that on the date that I sent the second fax, so that the first document would comport with the second document I sent. It would have the same date on it.
Okay, so between June 1, if we were to, well, strike that, if your testimony earlier was that you would have probably received a call or an email, likely from Justice Lawfrey, about this move?
It could have been. I don't know if it came directly from Justice Lawfrey or his secretary or from Mr. Canterbury, but I was notified somehow.
Okay, and if it would be in your email, we could look between June 1 and June 18th to find that, if it came by email. To change from the 21st.
Yes, if you go back and look at the email record, if I did receive something by email, it would be in that record.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lovejoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Atkins, I wanted to ask you about these renovations that you've testified about. I recall, I think it was last year, might be the year before, some discussion here about some bathrooms that were remodeled down the hall. And there was a dispute that arose between, I think, the Senate and the governor. In that discussion, one of the issues that came to light was a Capitol Building Commission. And as I understand, that's a body that must vet and approve requests to make what are defined as substantial physical changes here in the Capitol grounds.
Yes, sir.
You familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
I want to ask you first, are any of the changes that you've discussed today subject to prior review and approval by the Capitol Building Commission?
Well, I happen to know that Mr. Canterbury was on the Capitol Building Commission, and I suspect that if there were any approvals required, he would certainly see about obtaining them.
So are you aware of whether the Capitol Building Commission either did approve or were asked to approve any of the renovations that you've testified to here today?
No, I don't know that they were.
When I tried to look up the constitution of that commission. I guess there's 9 members, 5 of which are appointed by the governor, 1 by the Senate President, 1 by the Speaker of the House, 1 by the court, and the Secretary of the Department of Administration, the latter 4 of which would be non-voting members. Who at the court would be the person responsible for coordinating with the Capitol Building Commission in the time period of these renovations?
Well, it would be Mr. Canterbury.
Okay, but you have no personal knowledge as to that process with regard to these renovations?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, do you recall ever seeing whether there was, before any contract was let or any construction began, an approval or any documentation evidencing approval, prior approval by the commission or anyone else?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Robinson.
Mr. Atkins, you say you were at the court for 35 years?
Yes, sir.
Over the 35 years, did they ever have to renovate your office?
Could you repeat that?
Did they ever renovate your office while you were at the court over 35 years?
Oh, my office? I had moved between several offices, and because I had moved to different offices, some of them had been recently renovated before I was relocated to different offices. But as a matter of fact, when I retired from the court, I had not renovated the office that I was personally in at all, and it was done after I left.
So there was never an occurrence where they had to renovate the office you were currently in, or ever an occurrence where they just had to remove the furniture so they could paint or anything like that?
I'm trying to think back over the different areas we were located in. In the 80s, the court administrator's office was moved from the 4th floor of the East Wing to its current location on the 1st floor. So at that time, all of the office space on the 1st floor was renovated. And subsequent to that move, the Office of Counsel was placed in the 4th floor area that was vacated by the Administrative Office of Courts. And that area, which is currently the Office of Counsel, was renovated at that time after the court administrator's office was moved to the 1st floor. So there were significant renovations done in both of those places, and I moved into an office that had been renovated at that time.
Okay. And I think in your education you stated that you had some human resources experience.
Say again?
You had some human resources experience?
Yes, sir.
And was that part of your job at the court at any time, was human resources or dealing with employee infractions or anything like that?
No, not particularly.
Okay. Are you aware of any occurrences where an employee of the court took home a piece of or some type of state property without permission?
Without permission, no, sir. I know that people who did have requirements for doing dictation from home or being online to view computer files from home would possibly have either a laptop or desktop computer from time to time, but
nothing without permission?
Nothing that I know of without permission, no, sir.
Okay. With your human resources education and your 35 years in state government, do you know what an infraction such as taking home state property without permission what would be the repercussions of that?
Well, it could be termination.
Could be, or would it be most likely termination?
It depends.
Okay.
If it were something that was relatively minor and innocuous, there could possibly be one warning, but I'd say if something like that was repeated, even if it was something minor, I would say it would lead to termination.
What about a desk valued at $42,000?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Over your time, was there ever any request from a justice that you declined to perform?
No, I don't know of anything that I was asked to do that appeared to be improper at the time.
During your last couple of years of the court, 2013, and you retired in 15, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe you'd feel comfortable declining to do any task that the Chief Justice would have requested?
If it was improper, yes, I would have not done it.
Okay. In over 35 years, how frequently did you have a part in, or were you aware of delivering furniture or any state property to a justice's personal home other than computers or something that we've discussed already that's kind of permissible?
To my knowledge, that didn't happen.
So over 35 years, other than the possible case that you're not aware was actually delivered, over 35 years, you're not aware of any other time a piece of state property was delivered to a justice's personal home?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes, I am aware of one. I believe a clock was delivered to Justice Ketchum's home.
So over your 35 years, there were two occurrences, one being a justice that's recently resigned and the other being what we're assuming was delivered was a Cass Gilbert desk to Justice Lawfrey's home.
Those are the only incidents I know of.
In 35 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Delegate Eisner.
Chairman, thank you for being with us.
Certainly.
Do you know, having worked with him a number of times, if Scott Young was personally present and participated in the June 20th move that's referenced in Exhibit 21 that's in front of you?
Yes, he was the person I talked to that day, and he was the person who was with the truck when it came to the Venable warehouse.
The two memos that you wrote both referenced a helper. Do you remember if Mr. Young had a helper with him that day?
Yes, he had 2 or 3 different people he would use. I don't think I can remember exactly which person he had with him that day.
Do you remember the names of any of the 2 or 3 people that he would regularly use that you had maybe gotten to know or seen dealing with him on regular occasions?
No, I just do Scott mostly.
Okay. All right. As I understand your testimony, you said you were not aware prior to June the 20th that anything was going to Dudley Drive. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that my understanding is that the first time you became aware of that's whenever you saw it on the bill that's attached to Exhibit 21?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you got that bill, knowing that that was outside the scope of the original assignment, did you call Scott Young and say, hey, what happened? Why'd you head to Dudley Drive? Or have any communications with Young's Moving Service about that?
No, I did not.
Did you have any contact with Justice Lawfrey about that?
No, I did not ask him about that.
Did you ask anybody as a follow-up why there was something new added to the bill before you approved its payment?
No, I didn't ask anybody about it.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Hanshaw. Delegate Flashauer.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Atkins, I have a couple questions. Was the delivery that's referred to Dudley Drive on this invoice the only delivery that you're aware of to Justice Lawfrey's home? that would involve Young's Moving Service or any employee of the court, a delivery?
That's all I'm aware of, yes, sir.
It's the only one you're aware of. Were there other times when other members of the court had personal items or other items moved to their homes on a temporary basis while there was renovations going on?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
So this was the only time you were aware that any justice took any type of, or had any type of furnishings or personal items taken from his or her office to their home by a moving service that the court arranged. Is that fair?
That's all I'm aware of, yes, sir.
Right. During the course of any communications regarding this particular move, did anyone refer to a piece of property as being a Cass Gilbert desk?
During the move or that time?
In other words, did anybody, for instance, this is just for instance, somebody might have said, be real careful because this is either a Cass Gilbert desk or a valuable desk.
Oh, no, sir.
Would the fact that a single item, it appears that the invoice is indicating that there's a single item delivered to Dudley Drive. Am I reading that correctly?
That was what was put on the invoice, yes.
Would that indicate to you that that particular item was of any particular significance because the special trip had been made to that delivery point and then a return to the Capitol to get other furniture?
Well, I don't know how to answer that other than the fact that it was an individual move, so there must have been some significance to what was taken.
Let me just ask it a little differently, maybe. The amount of furniture that was in the office that was intended to be moved, did it appear to you that that amount of furniture could have been moved in a single load?
Oh, yes.
So the fact that there were two loads, actually, one with a single item and perhaps some other furniture, and then a return to the Capitol to load up the vehicle again, would that indicate any type of special handling of the single item to you?
Well, it would seem an unusual use of resources to take the entire moving van to move one item unless that item were large enough to require a van and movers.
And did you see anything in Justice Lawfrey's office that was of that size that would have required a single trip for it, just for its that one item?
Well, I believe there were desks and tables and couches and what you'd normally expect to find in an office.
Okay. Let me ask you a different question, totally different question. We learned yesterday through the Legislative Auditor's Office that there was a substantial amount of money that had been built up in the court over the years, and by 2012 they had, I'll call it a surplus of about $29 million. This is 2012. And by the time you left in 2015, or at least at the end of that fiscal year, that amount had decreased to about $1.8 million. So in other words, $20 million had been spent out of that reserve in addition to what the court was normally appropriated by the legislature during that time. So my question to you, with that lengthy buildup, I apologize for the buildup, did you notice any unusual activity during those last 3 years of your employment that would indicate unusual expenses, especially in areas that you were responsible for?
No, I think there may have been some new responsibilities the court might have taken on during that time. I think they might have been related to some new personnel type requirements. And as far as that's concerned, I wasn't primarily involved with anything related to budgeting or the financial management of the court. I didn't have any direct involvement with it. But I didn't see anything in relation to the work that I did that would indicate an expenditure of that nature.
Did you hear any discussions to the effect that we need to spend some money, we need to be a little more free with our spending for the next few years, anything of that sort?
Nobody talked with me about things like that.
Didn't throw any money your way, right?
No.
Okay.
No Christmas bonus.
No bonus. Okay. Did you notice any significant increase in staffing during that time frame of the court? That would be about the last 3 years of your employment.
I didn't have any specific recognition of anything like that.
All right, thank you. We have a few more folks to ask questions, but thank you.
Certainly.
Is Mr. Allen back? Questions? That was a surprise. All right. Counsel, any redirect?
Yes, sir. I have just a couple questions. One of the things that we've been tasked with as a committee in looking at this is recommendations that we can make concerning the improvement of the processes. And you spoke earlier about your attendance at the Institute for Court Management.
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that's essentially almost a master's degree level program. What are some of the things that you learned at the Institute for Court Management?
Well, courthouse design, space management, workflow management, caseload management, financial management of the courts, different type of technological innovations in the court system. They had a courtroom 21 set up that showed the different types of innovative programs that were being implemented in many of the courts around the country. So those were the type of things that we studied. We had, I believe it was 9 different seminars you'd have to attend on these things, plus a 6-week residence program at William & Mary, where the National Center for State Courts is located in Williamsburg. And then you have to prepare a paper and present and defend it at the graduation. And the reception after that was at the U.S. Supreme Court, very kindly sponsored by Justice of the Court, Sandra Day O'Connor.
So this is a prestigious program, I think we can safely say.
At that time, there were not very many people who had achieved that, but as time has gone on, more and more court employees around the country have completed that program.
To the best of your knowledge, how long has it been since West Virginia sent anyone to that program?
I was the last one to attend that, and that was in '93.
And you believe this program has a great deal of value and use in educating court managers to skillfully manage our court system?
Yes, I found it to be of great value, and it really opened my eyes about a lot of things that could be done to improve court management.
And did you subsequently integrate many of those things that you had learned into the technological advancements and management improvements that were made to our courts in that time frame?
Yes, I could as much as possible.
And were there other West Virginians at that time who had similar background and similar knowledge?
Well, there were 2 people. Bob Slack, who was court administrator for Kanawha County, had completed the program. And Mary Durkin, who was an assistant director of the court, had completed that program.
And you have been a manager, to reiterate, of the state courts for essentially 35 years.
Yes, sir.
And you believe that program has a very real value?
Yes, it does.
Would you recommend that West Virginia further educate its court officials by the employment of that program or an equivalent program?
Well, I think that young people who are really interested in the administrative field should be identified and actually sponsored to attend the program.
And again, you would, if you think that it does have very real value for this state?
Yes, I do.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. That's all I have.
Delegate Fleischauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to say thank you for your service to our state, but in line with our attorney's questions, one of the things we are doing in these proceedings is trying to determine if there are things we should change to improve our processes. And of course, and I wish I would have given the same thank you to our previous speaker, because both of you were there for a long time and have tried very hard to assist the Judiciary Committee. But do you have any suggestions for us on ways we should change our procedures, both from your experience and what you observed, or from what you've read in the paper, to improve the processes, and so we can avoid some of the problems that we're experiencing now? Do you have any suggestions, or would you like to think about that?
Well, I do have a recommendation. I've felt that for a long time that the Chief Justice position of the court should be a specific elected position, so you have someone who has the actual administrative responsibility for the court system. Just as in the U.S. Supreme Court, you have the Chief Justice and you have the Associate Justices. And Chief Justice Roberts has responsibility for many of the administrative functions of the U.S. Supreme Court and has some supervisory capacity over the Associate Justices. Of course, that's very limited, but he does have that responsibility. And I think that the rotation of the justices does create a situation where it harms continuation of programs. For one thing, you may have a justice that's very interested in establishing a certain type of program, and the follow-on justice may not be interested in it. So I think that there could be some benefits in establishing a Chief Justice position.
Anything, and obviously we'd have to think about that and figure that out. Anything else with respect to the matters that you had specific authority over? I'm thinking of inventory. I mean, there's, or anything like that that you would recommend that we could improve?
Well, the inventory is entered into the OASIS system, and the OASIS system may be a little bit cumbersome, but there needs to be enough effort put into it that if we're going to use that system, then people need to make it work, and that should be encouraged.
I heard when you were speaking before, you seemed to feel that the OASIS was a little bit better in not keeping track of waste baskets, and there was a $1,000 limit. When I heard that, I was thinking that perhaps that was a little high. But maybe, is it your opinion that that's just right, or that a smaller amount would be good? You know, you could have some things disappear that would never be tracked.
Well, that's true. You know, when they came out with that, I thought it was a little bit high myself. So it may be that working with the OASIS people, it could be adjusted.
Okay.
And they did want to make sure that any computer server
right, and
would
you
be
indicated
totally
that was
controlled.
that kind of equipment. And it sounds like the Cass-Gilbert desks, which by statute were not supposed to disappear from the Capitol, were not included in the OASIS. But was the OASIS only for new equipment?
No.
Or new furniture? Or new things?
The items that were in the financial information management system were transferred into the OASIS system. That was a difficult job, but they were transferred into the OASIS system. So they should be resident there now.
You think that they ought to be in there?
They should be there, yes. They should be there.
And would that only be if they were in there before? If that was transferred over?
Well, it wasn't a computer-based transferring of the information. It was manual input.
And so that
and
the
that was
handwritten documents were
definitely done.
typed into the new system.
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
the FIM system was computerized.
Okay, that's what I thought you said.
Yeah, and from the FIM's printout, manual input was done into the OASIS system, excluding those items below the value threshold, but including all computer processors.
Now, you said that you had heard hearsay about the Cass-Gilbert desks, but that you didn't know which ones they were.
Or where they were.
Okay. Were you aware that there were Cass-Gilbert desks at the Supreme Court?
The desks that were known as Cass-Gilbert desks, yeah, they were seen there. They were present.
And would those, do you think that for something so valuable, like this chandelier or like those lamps in the rear, which presumably were designed and specified by Cass-Gilbert, that they should be marked or have some kind of an identification on them so that if they are removed in violation of our law about our cultural preservation, that they could be identified at a later date? Do you think that would be helpful?
Oh, yes, and as state property, they all should have had a West Virginia Supreme Court property tag. We had the little blue stick-on property tags that was supposed to be on every substantial item of equipment.
What did they look like? What was that blue tag like? What was the size?
It says West Virginia Supreme Court. It has the tag number on it.
Was it metal or tape or paper?
It's one of those metallic type that comes off of a roll, and you peel it off and it'll stick on, and it's just a regular state type property tag.
Do you know who at the Supreme Court would have known if the Cass-Gilbert desks had those tags, since you didn't know? I'm assuming you didn't know because you didn't know which ones they were, for sure.
Since they were original to the Capitol, it may have been that they had just been present in the Capitol before there was even a property management system implemented. And they may never have been tagged because everyone just thought, well, there it is, it's going to stay there, So that's what I suspect.
So you would recommend that we fix that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before we start the second round, let me just mention one thing. It appears to me, and maybe I'm missing something, I think there's no dispute that this Cass-Gilbert desk ended up in Justice Lawfrey's house. There may be a dispute as to when it was transported there, or the circumstances under which it got there, or the circumstances surrounding when it was returned, but unless I'm missing something, I think that's pretty much undisputed. So the second round of questions, let's try to focus on what's in dispute and not what's undisputed. All right, I'm going to begin with, unless somebody thinks I'm wrong about that, I think Justice Lawfrey has admitted the desk was there. There's questions whether he knew it was a... Pardon? Tom? Mr. Deli Fast?
Mr. Chairman, could you point me or us to the document or the evidence where he admitted that? I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I would just like to...
I'm thinking that either in the op-ed, which we are distributing, or in one of the videos that we'll be showing, that he acknowledges that there was a desk there that was transported back. There's some question as to whether he acknowledges it was a Cass-Gilbert desk. And that might also be in some of the...
I mean, I just haven't seen that thus far, and so...
Delegate Pushkin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just referring to what was just asked, I believe there was a statement put out by the court where they said, yeah, the desk was at his house, it's now in the warehouse, and they said the reason the desk was at it, that's when they referred to a policy that doesn't exist, this home office policy. And the statement, I don't believe it came from Justice Lawfree, it came from Ms. Bundy over at the Supreme Court, where they said, yeah, the desk was at his house. Whether or not he knew it was a Cass Gilbert desk, I guess could be questioned. It was said when it was there, but yeah, it was at his house and then went to the warehouse, and they admitted that.
And to Delegate Pass, I'll try to find my source of that information, but I was under the impression all along that it wasn't a question of whether it was there, it was a question of when it got there, whether he knew it was a Cass Gilbert desk, and some issues about the circumstances surrounding how it was returned. But Delegate Pushkin, you have further comment on that? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, and the same could be said for the couch that belonged to former Justice Albright. That was in the same statement. They said that I guess he felt it was.
We're going to get to the couch later. Okay.
Okay, but that was also at his house.
All right, let's go. We're going to start our second round of questioning. I'm just going to start again over Delegate Overington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Atkins, your responsibility was to sort of keep an inventory of the different equipment, furniture that was being held in surplus.
Yes, that's correct.
And so you have, is this both for Kanawha County in this area as well as statewide?
It would be statewide, yes.
Do the justices as well as the circuit judges have, and the magistrates and family judges have access to that inventory?
Whenever we would update inventories, we would send a copy out to the clerk of the appropriate court.
And some of that would be owned by the court system. Others, you say, may be owned by if the county had provided with some of those resources, so it's identified by who owns it as well?
Yes, that's correct. In the case of the circuit courts, the county would provide the furniture, telephone service, paper and equipment, things of that nature, by code. You know, it was set up by code, and the magistrate court system and the family court system are the responsibility of the state court system.
So the ownership is sort of mixed on who owns that, and that would, is there any effort to sell any of that surplus equipment?
Well, on the county equipment, they would have a county property tag in the circuit courts, and so we would know that, and it wouldn't be our equipment. Now, there was equipment that we would provide to the circuit court that was not required for the counties to provide to the circuit court, and that would be new things like the computer equipment or evidence presentation equipment or video conferencing equipment, because those were not anticipated when that code section was written. So the counties would primarily just have furniture for their inventory.
So they would actually sort of have the ownership and have say about what can be done or how it would be disposed?
Yes, if it's the county's property, they have sole discretion on the disposition of that property and disposal of it when it needs to be disposed.
Has the state of Virginia ever tried to reclaim that 1843 property that was owned by them?
Oh, not only that, but they made us pay for it, didn't they?
Now, for the courts, do the justices, so they have access to where the furniture is stored, and they could go down and say, I like this, I might want to have it for my office, or do they have access to that facility?
They would have to have someone direct them to the warehouse if they wanted to go there, since it was a secured facility.
Have any of them at any time said, I'd like to, instead of buying new equipment, I'd like to check to see what's available, and maybe there's something I like down there so I won't have to buy new equipment. Has that ever happened during your time?
Well, it seems that I have some memory that has happened, but I can't remember exactly who was involved at the time. Of course, if somebody wanted to come look at it, they could.
Nothing recent in the last 10 years where any of them have wanted to see what's available at no additional cost?
No. When Justice Starcher was a member of the court, he was very interested in furnishings and making sure that the magistrate courts and the family courts had adequate furnishings, and he took a more of an interest in that type of thing than any of the other justices.
So he would have made that available to other courthouses to see what they might be able to save and what the inventory was?
Yes. We would save items of furniture that were in very, very good condition, so that if we had a court that had some furniture that was either damaged or was so old it was no longer usable, we would have a little bit of stock so we could do replacements for them. I know we had one court that had a water leak in the ceiling, and 2 offices of furniture were ruined. And of course, we had the one courthouse that burned down up at Berkeley Springs.
What determines when the surplus property is sold rather than having the storage costs?
Oh, the storage costs?
Or what would determine if the surplus equipment, furniture is sold rather than just continue to be stored?
Well, if we would have more than a couple of items of a certain type of furniture, and then we would take the furniture that was in the worst condition, and that would be listed to be sent to surplus property, and we would dispose of it that way.
Now, you talked about how you move furniture in and out. Are there other, with the one missing desk, are there other ways that are not through the state system that furniture can be moved out? Could a official have it moved out some other way?
No, the only authorized way to remove any of that furniture is to surrender it to the surplus property unit. And the same thing with the very few vehicles that was in the Supreme Court fleet. Whenever a vehicle had to be turned in, we would have to surrender it to the surplus property unit, and they would sell it at auction.
So somebody,
as they would the furniture.
So somebody would not be able to, on their own, move furniture out of their office unless it was in the middle of the night or something like that?
Oh, no. No, that shouldn't happen, because the Capitol is being a relatively secure place now. And if there were going to be movers into the Capitol, they'd have to use the loading dock, and that's not going to happen without the Capitol Police knowing that. And they'd have to get notification ahead of time for somebody to do that. So anytime that would happen, there would be a record of it that the Capitol Police would have.
And now I wanted to, the date changed from the 21st to the 20th. When you're moving, it's sort of disruptive if you're during a work day when you have people in their offices moving around, that type of thing. Is that would that not be sort of a disruptive process? So would you try to move when on the weekends or on holidays to avoid that disruption to other employees?
Well, I'm not sure, but since this was in June, I'm not sure if the court was in session at that time. It would probably be best to look at the record and see if the court was still in session at that time. It may not have been in session. But
I believe that June 20th, our state's birthday, would be a state holiday.
Yes.
So that changing that date might make it a little bit easier for different offices that would be in operation. It'd be less disruptive for them to be able to move on a holiday when employees are not.
Yeah, that is correct. Because you would have by necessity be using the elevator and the hallways, even in non-court areas, and the loading dock, taking up space in the loading dock. So it would be less disruptive to do it on a holiday.
So that change in the date to the state holiday may have been a practical consideration when it would have made sense to have it on a less disruptive day to other employees in the facility.
Yes, that could have been a practical consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Elliot Foster.
Thank you. My question in our JIC report, it reports that the desk that was at the house was returned to the warehouse on November 30th, 2017. And I understand at that time you were not employed with the Corps. You retired in 2015.
That's correct, yes.
But you mentioned that access to the codes for this warehouse was very limited.
Yes.
Is this something that whenever someone retired during your case of employment, were the codes changed whenever somebody retired?
Normally that would change, yes. And I know that frequently working with the court marshal, Arthur Angus, we would change access codes. I know that on the few occasions in the court administrator's office where people had been let go for cause, then the access codes to get into the court administrator's office would change. And if that person would have been someone having access to the warehouse, then we would have had to change that too. But yes, the court security section did maintain and change security codes as needed.
And you said it was a very short list of people that had access to those codes on the warehouse.
Yes.
Would you be able to provide us with that list of names of who would have access, particularly the ones that were still employed in 2017 who had access when you were working there?
Yes, I think I can, yes.
Okay. If you could, that list of names would be helpful.
Okay, I'll do that with counsel.
Thank you.
Delegate Fast.
Thank you. You stated that you had a court computer in your basement?
Yes, that was in the 80s.
Okay, and did you have that all the way up until your retirement?
No, when I left the home confinement program, that was returned to the court.
Okay. Do you know who else besides justices, what other Supreme Court employees had computers at their home Supreme Court computers?
Well, there were several people who had laptop computers, and of course that's a portable thing, so if you have work you can take it home. And there were a number of people that had laptop computers, and I couldn't begin to name them all, but I'm sure our IT section could tell you about that.
So multiple people besides justices?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
People who had responsibilities that they had to keep databases or do things like that.
What other equipment, if any, in addition to the laptop computer, any printers? I'll start with that. Printers. Do you know if other non-justice employees had printers at their homes?
Not that I know of.
What about are you aware that any non-justice employees had desktop computers?
I don't think so, because the IT section would primarily be the people I'm talking about, and They may be called upon at different times to troubleshoot different problems with the state network and things like that. So they would have to have them available to them at any time.
When you had your computer, it was a desktop style computer?
Yes.
Okay, and who serviced it?
Well, I didn't have any need for having it serviced during the time that I used it. And if I would have, I'd have simply taken it into the IT section to be repaired.
They would not have come to your home?
Oh, no.
Okay. And during your tenure at the Supreme Court, are you aware of any policy governing home offices, home office equipment, home office accessories?
No, sir.
Okay. And to your knowledge, what equipment did the justices have at their homes?
I can't specifically say for each individual justice, but it is reasonable that they would have a computer that would allow them to access the database of court cases, because we could not expect them to only do work in the office. They had so much work to do with these cases. A lot of times they would be reasonably doing work on their cases and reviewing the cases at home.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Is that extra? Delegate Lane, questions? Further follow-up questions? Delegate Pushkin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question. You can count that.
I'm counting.
And sort of a follow-up. I was sorry, I apologize. I was out of the room temporarily when Delegate Robinson was asking. As a follow-up to that, just if someone that worked under you in your time at the court were to violate the surplus property policy and remove an item from this building that was state property, would that be grounds for dismissal?
I would say yes, it would. I'd have to report that to Mr. Canterbury for disposition.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Holland.
Thank you. I just have one question, follow up on an earlier question. You were asked about permission taking home property would be punishable, is that correct? Without permission if you take property?
Without permission, yes, it would be.
Okay, my question to that then is, who is it the one that would give justices permission to take home property? It seems sort of subjective since they answer to no one.
Well, something like that would have to be approved by the justices together.
So in order for one to take something home for use, then it would have to be a majority of the justices to agree to it? Is that normal practice?
Yes, I think that would be. I know it was the practice when long ago when a volume of legal books was approved for sale to a retiring justice. All of the court had to approve of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Delegate Byrd, questions? Delegate Robinson, any questions? Follow-up? One?
Just 1 minute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a quick one. Just in general, are you aware of the dinnerware that was at the Supreme Court that they purchased? I think it's Fiestaware, a couple $1,000 dinnerware plates and all that. Was that anything that you were aware of being there?
I had seen this dinnerware in the kitchen of the chambers area at one point.
Do you know about when it showed up? I mean, is that something that was, around in the 80s, or is that something that in the 2013 range showed up?
I think it was some time ago. I can't give you an exact time, but it wasn't near the time of my retirement. It had been there for some time.
Okay. Were you aware of, do you ever spend much time in Justice Lawfree's office or any of the other justices' offices?
Not a lot of time, but I had been in there
when it was first renovated.
A few times.
When Justice Lawfree's office was first renovated, do you remember framed photos or framed a couple, they're not exactly photos, but framed items being in his office?
Can you tell me what nature the framed items were?
The one most prominent in my mind is a framed book cover.
Oh, no, I don't have any memory of that.
What about, I believe it was mentioned to me, $2 bills or something of that sort? Do you remember would there be any record that we could look up of framing or that sort of thing, or what time period that would have been around the renovations?
Yeah, unless the contractors took some photos or Jennifer Bundy would have some. I don't know that there would be any existing.
Would there be any specific art store or something the court would have used to do these things?
Not that I've had any contact with, no, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Hanshaw, any further follow-up? Delegate Flashow? I have no questions. Counsel, any further follow-up?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman. I believe we can release this witness.
Mr. Carr, any questions? I believe you're done. Mr. Atkins, we thank you for your being here today and your patience, and also for your service to our country and our state. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Well, I was glad to come in and do my civic duty. Thank you.
To the members, I think I mentioned when we started this week that the staff had been going through voluminous documents we received from JIC, some as recently as the day before yesterday. What we're going to do now is, if you notice in the JIC charges 1 through 12, there are a number of allegations regarding the veracity of statements that were made by Justice Lawfree. We're going to try to set up some evidence that we're going to introduce to you next week. We'll do that today by playing, if you'll notice on page 8 of the charges from the JIC, there's reference to an interview, or not an interview, a testimony before the Finance Committee on January 12 of 2018. There's a segment in that reference to the quote that's actually, the language is omitted. So what we thought we would do is play the tape in its entirety for you. We've also had a transcript of that made so that you can follow along. If you notice any variance between the transcript and what you hear, I'd appreciate it if you bring it to our attention, just to be sure that ultimately we end up with a transcript that we all agree, if that's possible, is accurate. Following that transcript, we're going to play an interview, one or more. Is it more than one? Just one. One interview that also is of Justice Lawfree. You may have seen it before. You may want to take some notes of what he said so that you can compare that with the evidence that we'll present next week. We've identified the evidence. We just have to authenticate it through certain witnesses, and we've had a little difficulty getting them here today, so we'll do that next week. That will be all we will do today, and we won't take any more testimony. So the benefit of the press, we'll play the tape, we'll play the video, and we will recess until next week. So if we're ready to play the gentlelady from the 35th, Delegate Lane. Question?
Where in the JIC memo we're going to be looking at?
The statement of charges should have been part of the notebook that was provided to everyone.
I've got that, but where does it refer to the testimony at the Finance Committee?
On page 8.
Okay, thank you.
Item 16. Everybody follow that? But you also have as Exhibit 23 the transcript that one of our staff has made of the tape. And you can follow along on that and compare it with what you hear. Obviously, there won't be any questions asked of the tape. So we'll just move from that point to the video. Are we ready? Delegate Pushkin, you have a question before we begin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it, I've never served on finance. Is it customary to, do they swear in witnesses during budget presentations?
We swear all witnesses under the new rules of the House.
Okay.
So this witness would have been sworn.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Apologize for the delay. I guess I wasn't aware of.
You have finance, you have probation, you have technology, you have education, and you have court services. So now we have these individuals who meet weekly, number one, and we have communication, we have transparency. We've hired another wonderful thing that we did along those same lines. We hired 2 procurement individuals.
I was going to ask, so you don't think you have the fox guarding the hen house?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So in the past, invoices would come in, invoices would get paid, invoices would go out. There's not a single invoice that comes in. My understanding is there's not a single invoice that comes into our court system where at least 2 individuals review those. And you know, I've been asked since this has occurred many times, well, don't the justices sign off on every invoice that comes through the court system? Well, no, and of course not, because we have more than 20, keep in mind, we're talking about an entire court system in all 55 counties. We have more than 25,000 invoices that come through the court system every single year. And on top of that, we have another 10 to 15,000 transactions on our purchasing cards. So, and we're also sitting down. We haven't had written procedures and protocols, and I want to have written procedures and protocols for everything. We need that. The people of West Virginia deserve that. So we want to put things in place so that not only this will never happen again, but it doesn't matter who is in the chief position or who's in the legislature or whatever. And another big thing that we did, and I know I touched upon it, but the change of the Chief Justice position is huge. It's not about me. I'm talking about 20 years down the road. Let's look at the renovation period, okay? These renovations occurred from 2008 until 2014, all right? I wasn't even on the court until 2013. So for that 6-year period, you had 5 individuals who served in a 1-year capacity as Chief Justice. I think that creates an impossibility. It puts a lot of pressure on each one of those individuals for any long-term project. I think that's one more example of how...
Well, you know, there is a lot of public pressure from this body to do something, because I don't think you would dispute that it was outrageous. There were a lot of claims. I mean, the average taxpayer, they're outraged from what was reported. So we want to make sure that there are some safeguards or assurances that this will not happen again. I think that is an absolutely legitimate concern and question. There is nobody more outraged by these purchases than me. Many people in this room have known me for more than 2 decades, and they know that I would have never approved of such things. However, there was clearly a failure of oversight at the court. These things happened. We can't go back and change them, but what we can do is go forward and make sure that something like this never happens again. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, regarding the transcript as compared to the tape, I noticed a few uhs that were not preserved, but did anybody notice any substantial difference between the transcript and the tape that you just heard? All right, we won't make any alterations. I think there may have been an and missed in there somewhere, but nothing substantive. Okay, are we ready for the video? Delegate Fast, you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, there are things discussed in this exhibit, and we just heard. I don't know what they're talking about. The context is not provided. Now, maybe somebody can just fill in the blanks quickly without calling a witness. For instance, right in the middle says, "This will never happen again." What will never happen again? It was outrageous. He talks about these purchases.
Well, let me just say that we are basically providing you with information to consider the charge that's on page 8, beginning at numbered 16, so that you can basically decide for yourself whether or not this charge is correct. And they're alleging that he was placed under oath and lied, and the lie that they are alleging in this charge is just this segment of the interview. This is testimony, my understanding is this testimony that Justice Lawfrey gave to the Finance Committee in support of their budget request as part of the regular budget hearings. We can get more of that tape if anybody thinks they need it, but this is specifically to provide you with a full segment of the interview on which this charge is based. But once again, we're open to requests for further information.
Okay, I'll hold off right now. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Counsel, you ready for the video?
Justice Lafayette, the first question I need to ask, I feel like, is why is there a couch that costs more than $30,000 in your chambers?
Kenny, it's absolutely outrageous that the prior administrative director would spend that much money on a couch with state money. I think it's outrageous, and I think it's shameful.
How much input did you have into what was going on after you were elected in 2012 and you came in 2013? How much input did you have in the renovations and the furnishing of your office?
Well, very little. I mean, when I came into office, the renovations were a part of 6.5 years of renovations. The first, third, and fourth floors, more than 96% of those renovations were completed by the time it came to my office. Mr. Canterbury put things together and came and asked for approval of maybe, do you like this desk or do you like this color or something like that.
Mr. Canterbury tells us on the record that you were very particular and specific in designing your office and in furnishing your office and the purchase of the couch. He said you were integral involved in that, the design on the floor. How would you respond to that?
Mr. Canterbury is a disgruntled, fired employee, and as he threatened us as he walked out the door, and he is trying to set this up for some lawsuit down the road. When I became the Chief Justice in January of this year, I started an investigation of Mr. Canterbury and the actions of his prior administration, And some of the things that I've discovered have been very troubling. So troubling, in fact, that I have personally contacted the United States Attorney's Office.
To look into it?
Absolutely.
How would, with the couch and with $6,000 window treatments, and when I'm not going to go through a litany of things, we know what we're talking about. How should an average person in West Virginia feel about how money was spent up here at the court?
Well, I think for the most part, the money was certainly spent with regard to the renovations of the first, third, and fourth floors responsibly, but I would never defend excessive spending. I think that it's shameful. While I may be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, I'm also a taxpayer and a citizen of this state, and I am outraged by the expenditures, excessive expenditures, of our prior administrative director.
So, to be clear, you did not select that couch, and you did not mandate the $20-some thousand in fabric changes for that couch?
Absolutely outrageous. The answer is no.
There's a wood design on your floor that we've talked ad nauseum about that added cost. Why were things like that added in a private office? I mean, it's not the Culture Center. I've talked to you about it. It's not the Capitol. It's nice, but it seems like it's excessive and extra for a private office.
Mr. Canterbury was in charge of the renovations starting, and I started as a justice on this court in January of 2013. He started the renovations around 2007, 2008. They went on for quite some time. And he was very much excited about trying to work on all of these offices, and he spent a lot of time on these things. I think that the floor is certainly very nice. I think that the price of the floor in my office is commensurate with the price of the floors in all of the other offices, with the exception of one, which is actually more. But Mr. Canterbury was in charge of these expenditures.
Did you have veto power to borrow an executive phrase? Could you have just said, or did you not know, or how did this happen?
Oh, we had no idea the cost of these furnishings. We would ask Mr. Canterbury, how much is this? Because I'm very frugal. Kenny, I live in an 1,100 square foot house. I'm very frugal. And I think that all elected officials should look at any expenditures as if it's coming out of your own pocketbook, your own checkbook. That's the way you should do things. The court had hired Mr. Canterbury in 2005, many years before, I guess approximately 8 years before I came to the court. He was in charge of the renovations, in charge of these expenditures, and he clearly, as we've discovered, was involved with some excessive spending.
He, in our interview with him, he said you were going to blame him for the expenditures, and his defense, his reasoning was, well, that was my boss. What was I supposed to do? The boss told me to do something, and I did it. Is that a correct characterization of what happened?
Absolutely not. Mr. Canterbury, in fact, used to call himself a constitutional officer and claimed to me that he had independent sovereign authority and that I couldn't do anything with regard to him because he had 3 other votes on the court. It's just not true at all. Again, Mr. Canterbury is a disgruntled, fired employee. He threatened court members on the way out the door. He's trying to set this up to damage the court, damage individual members of the court for some future lawsuit.
How could people be confident that the money that's being spent here today, in your tenure, since you took over as chief and Mr. Canterbury is now gone, that money's being spent responsibly? I mean, if it could happen then, what is changing so it doesn't happen anymore? That's an absolutely excellent question. So when I became the chief in January of 2017, we did various things. We started an investigation of everything that was happening under Mr. Canterbury's prior experiences here. We also started a complete reorganization of our administrative office from top to bottom. We brought in the National Center for State Courts. We're about transparency, honesty, and accountability. Our finance division has changed drastically and will continue to change. We've hired a couple of procurement individuals. We have a multiple person process for every invoice that comes through the system now. Up to a couple of days ago, just for this year alone, we've processed more than 25,000 invoices. Keep in mind, we're not talking about just the 5 justices in Charleston. We have a unified system of courts,
and we're over the whole court system for the entire branch of government in West Virginia. And I will also tell you that since I became the chief in January, we have cut spending by more than $7 million. We have an excellent administrative director now in Gary Johnson, and we're putting the procedures and protocols in place that, quite frankly, should have been here during the last decade.
So how did all of this happen? How can you sum up in a nutshell how we wound up with a $500,000 renovation in Justice Davis's chambers, or a $34,000 couch that's sitting in your office, or a carpet that's outside that cost almost $60,000? How did we get here? How did this happen?
Well, the court hired Mr. Canterbury, again, many years before I came here. I was not involved in his hiring. I was certainly involved in his firing. So I wasn't here during the vast majority. Again, 96% of all of the renovation projects that occurred, I wasn't even here as a justice at that point. But I believe prior justices had a trust in Mr. Canterbury. But as we have learned and continue to learn as we look into everything, our investigation is pretty thorough, and it is being aided by federal authorities, and we're going to get to the bottom of this stuff. We just are.
Do you keep the couch? It'd be crazy to get rid of it now, right? If it's 34, what do you do with it?
What in the world? I've never in my life heard of a $30-some thousand couch. I really think it is outrageous and shameful.
There were a lot of expenses, window treatments, not just for you, but for the renovation. Was all that necessary, or do you think we went? I mean, we're talking about public money in a state that is, we're $8 million behind projections right as we speak, and the last 5 years have been horrible. Did we spend too much money?
Well, I can tell you, again, the renovations were about 6.5. Right. Well, no, not that. About 6.5 years of renovation. Right. So whether I'm here or not, I will tell you that it was extremely important to take care of some structural issues, some electrical issues, heating and cooling issues, plumbing issues. We have a magnificent building, and we have to take care of this building. But I will never defend excessive, ridiculous, wasteful spending, ever.
That's kind of what there was work that needed to be done here.
No question about it.
It's an 80-year-old building.
Well, look at this beautiful room that we're in right now. We have to take care of this building.
So while some of the expenses were obviously justified and needed, would you stipulate, I'm going to use the legal question, would you agree that it looks like on the surface when you're looking at the receipts that we really went overboard in some ways, regardless of whether Mr. Canterbury is responsible or the checks and balances didn't catch him, or somebody asked for a gold-plated toilet? It somehow had happened, and that we spent a lot of money.
There were some expenditures that were absolutely ridiculously excessive by Mr. Canterbury, and I will never defend those expenditures. I think he should be held personally accountable for that.
Talk to me about the rug that's outside. How do we get to a $58,000 carpet?
Well, the carpet, it's a beautiful carpet, but that carpet happened well before me being here as a justice. But after I became a justice, I asked Mr. Canterbury, I said, how much was this carpet? I've heard it was very expensive. He told me it was $17,000. I told him that I thought that was ridiculous. I've now uncovered that it was more than $58,000. But this is just one more example of a long line of misfeasance and malfeasance and mismanagement by Mr. Canterbury, and we're going to get to the bottom of all of it. Kenny, when we're finished with this, you're going to see this branch being the most transparent branch in the state of West Virginia.
How would you characterize you've kind of characterized him in his actions, but how would you characterize the 3 years you worked with Mr. Canterbury as an employee of the court?
It was the most professional experience in my entire life. Kenny, I wrote a book years ago about corruption in politics. I believe in these concepts about cleaning up government, about waste in government. I'm very glad that Mr. Canterbury is no longer with the court system.
When you have 3, you can do what you want.
That's correct.
When you have 18, you can do what you want in the Senate. When you have 51 in the House, even if there's a different 3 at some point, are there policies and procedures in place to protect taxpayers?
There are lots already, but more to come. We're working very close with the National Center for State Courts. Let me tell you another change that the court made. So we started this in January with my tenure. My first act was to discharge Mr. Canterbury. And look what's happening. He's running out. He's trying to discredit the court, talking about things that he did
trying to blame others. So we're digging into everything, and soon thereafter, my colleagues voted, I didn't seek this, to extend my term from 1 year, because the Chief Justices would rotate 1 year at a time, to a 4-year term. And that allows us to have more stability and accountability. I'm looking under every rock, and we're going to clean this place up. I'm proud to work here, Kenny.
You mentioned Mr. Canterbury threatened the court as he left. What were his threats?
It was a very troubling situation. He threatened. He said he would destroy the court, and he would. He said, "You all will pay for this." But it was much more than that. It was more lengthy. Generally, we do not discuss personnel matters.
Charged tonight in the death of their 8-month-old baby. We first brought you this story late last month.
Okay, that concludes the planned agenda for today. We'll be here at 9 a.m. on next Thursday. By that time, we will have gone through all of the JIC information. We have a number of witnesses already subpoenaed. So we should have a pretty full day Thursday and Friday. One warning, our committee chef is not going to be here next week, so we'll probably not work beyond 6 on Thursday, unless people want to bring in pizza and work till 8 or 9, but otherwise we can plan to work till around 6 on Thursday, try to get a full day on Friday and Saturday, and see how far we come by then. Any questions in the meantime? Yes, sir. Jim.
Is there any way we could take a walk through the office today? My worry is we're asking some questions about things that are movable, and if we don't go quickly, they may come back. Or
we can ask. I don't know if we have the ability to demand, but we can ask. It should be open, at least part of it, open to the public. The gentleman asked if we could take a walk through the Supreme Court before we leave today. We'll recess, but those of you who want to do that, we can go as a group. It's unorganized, disorganized chaos, but we'll do it and see what happens. Okay, Delegate Fast.
Mr. Chairman, I have read a transcript of that video, but I've seen that somewhere before, not in video form, but in print form. Can the staff or someone point me to where that is? I cannot find it.
Partly in the JIC.
It's partly in the JIC transcript in these charges at 1 through 12.
In the charges?
In fact, I think it's the first one. But we have a transcript we'll provide you with when we come back on Thursday.
Okay, that'd be great.
It'll be an exhibit, probably the next numbered exhibit.
Thank you.
Other questions before we recess?
Talking about the issue they brought up
Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we stand in recess until 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, July 19th.
You've heard the gentleman's motion. All in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are in recess until 9 a.m. next Thursday. Those of you who want to try to invade the quarters of the Supreme Court will go en masse.